Hi, everybody, and welcome again to the Musical Innertube. I am Don Rooney.
And I am John Timpain, and our guest today, and we are very, very happy to have him on the Musical Innertube, is Michael Hingson. I think I can best describe Michael Hingson as a brand. He is a writer, a commentator. He is he's done so many things, and we'll ask him how he describes himself in just a minute. But one of the things I want to say is how we know Michael. In fact, back at the University of California at Irvine, where two of us went, we were on the radio station together. Michael and I were. And of course, Don would come down and help me do a radio show. And of course, he met Mike during those experiences. And Mike used to listen to us religiously, didn't you, Mike?
I did, absolutely.
And that's what I'm afraid of. And
it paid to be the program director of the station for a year, but go ahead.
That's right. Exactly. Well, I forgot about that.
Religiously, he had to be on bended knee when he was listening to us.
I had to force myself, yeah.
I guess you were the program director when I first started a show, if I recall. And that's how we got to be pals. And Michael, I suppose we should talk about your vision for a moment. Can you tell the folks, what the situation is with that?
I have lots of vision. So I am blind. I have been blind my entire life. So what he's talking about is that. So I am on a soapbox. People say, well, when you're blind, they classify you as visually impaired. And the last time I checked, if you really deal with grammar, blind people don't look differently. So I'm not visually impaired. I suppose you can say since eyesight is equated to vision, it's vision impaired, but not visually impaired, because I don't think that makes a big difference. At least I've never seen a difference in a blind person as opposed to a sighted person.
I'm sure you haven't.
I haven't.
I mean, one of the things that impressed me a lot when you were the first person I knew who was deeply into technological aids for the person who's like you. And you had, I think the first one that I really became enamored with, you had a tape machine that could play tapes really fast going forward. It was the first time I'd ever seen this. And it wasn't to go fast forward. It was to play the tapes fast so you could take them on board, just as I would be doing, running my eyes over the text. And I said to myself, now you see, this guy, it really has a great attitude, which you always did. And then when you did your radio show, you know where everything was. You knew how to turn on everything and run the discs. You were much better at it than I was. And my favorite shows of yours, Michael, were where you would just turn around and get a record out of the library.
They were fun.
It was wonderful. You just take the record, go, okay, I'll do the fifth track on this one, and the next one I'll do the second track. So we would have a totally, how would you put it?
Random show.
It was great though, because it spoke volumes about the way that you went at things. You were joyful, you were improvisational, you were resourceful, and that's what what I think of you.
Most of the time, what I did is I played old radio shows, and that's still a hobby where I collect old classic shows from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. And now there's a big debate. When do old radio shows, OTR, when does that end? And so I'm on a list where they finally decided that it ended with the last two shows on CBS, yours truly, Johnny Dollar, and Suspense, ending in 1962. So now they're saying that shows that were created after that, like NPR's Star Wars, and there are any number of other ones, the CBS Mystery Theater, those are silver radio as opposed to old OTR. So people argue about everything.
Then there's the Musical Innertube, which is tarnished radio.
There's that.
So, that's interesting to me, because I can just barely remember, and I'm talking about when I was 4 and 5, visiting my grandma and grandpa, and they would listen to, radio serials in the afternoon still, and this was in the late 50s.
Well, and I'm the same way. It's all from the collection as opposed to really hearing them. And I've heard reprises of shows, but I don't remember them much when I was growing up, although they were there. But I did listen to the last few years of CBS. On Sunday night, they had Yours truly, Johnny Dollar, the action-packed expense account of Insurance Investigator, Suspense, which was a long-running show, Have Gun Will Travel, and Gunsmoke. And so those are the last ones that were part of the real OTR era.
Mike, a question I have for you. So, after you graduated from Irvine, can you take us through a thumbnail sketch of your career after that? What you went into and that kind of thing.
So I got my master's degree in physics and a secondary teaching credential from UC Irvine, and 7 years of radio, up against 60 Minutes for most of that time. And in Orange County, we won. We pushed Wallace into the dust. Of course, he was an old radio announcer that did the Green Hornet and other criminal things. So, I've always said that Mike Wallace just liked to associate with criminals anyway. So I regret never having had a chance to meet him. What a great guy. Anyway, I also, during college, joined the National Federation of the Blind, which is a consumer organization. It's the largest organization of blind consumers in the country, over 50,000 members. And along the way in 1974, they got approached by this guy, Ray Kurzweil, who's now a very famous inventor and futurist and so on. And he said, I've got a machine that will take a picture. It's a whole lot different than just a digital shot, but take a picture of a printed page and read it out loud. And it doesn't matter what type style or type styles are on the page or any of that stuff. It will read it out loud. And that way blind people can read print. And a lot of people had been approached by Ray to get help funding the development of the machine, and nobody believed him. Well, the National Federation of the Blind didn't believe him, except that he got real insistent. This really works. And we're always hearing about people who say they've got the greatest technology that's going to save blind people from doom. And finally, one of the people who he talked with was convinced enough that he got the president of the National Federation of the Blind to agree to send him up to Ray's lab in Massachusetts. But this guy, Jim Gashel, who was the director of government affairs at the Washington office, said, Ray, I don't want to see you read what you read. Either it's going to read what I bring up or forget it. Well, he went up, it did, and a relationship was born that actually still goes to this day. So the Federation and Ray developed a program to get funding from foundations to buy several of the machines and put them around the country in places where blind people could use them. And out of college, I was hired to live out of suitcases and a toolbox when I had to repair machines.
Wow.
In hotels for 18 months, literally traveling around the country wherever machines were and doing all the things to run that project. And at the end, we developed a series of recommendations of what needed to go in the machine. And then I was hired by Ray to do the same thing. But after about 8 months, I was called into the office of the VP of marketing, and he said, we got to lay you off because, like a lot of engineering companies, we've hired too many non-revenue producing people. And although your job is absolutely valuable and we love it, and you're doing a great job, we need to get revenue producing people in here. So we're going to lay you off. And then there was this pause, and he said, unless you want to go into sales. Now, I'm a science guy, so I had to debate about it. I think it took like a micro nanosecond to say, sure, I'll go into sales. And part of the reason for that was that the unemployment rate among employable blind people then and now is in the 70% range.
Oh, is that true? Is that really true?
Absolutely true. It's not because blind people can't work. It's because people think blind people can't work. Anyway, I went into sales and was successful until Xerox bought Kurzweil's company, and then they got rid of all of the pre-Xerox takeover salespeople. And I wasn't at that time even selling the reading machine for the blind. They had a commercial version, and instead of costing $50,000, the reading machine for the blind, this was only a $125,000 machine. Probably get you a deal on one still for $124,550, but then I had to go look for a job again. Couldn't find one, no matter that I had a good track record. And so I started my own company with a couple of other folks selling computer-aided design systems to architects. A blind guy selling the most graphically intense machine in the world. Why not? I didn't need to work it. I needed to know how to work it so I could sit somebody down in front of it and describe it. And we also hired people to do the actual selling of it as well. And I did that for 4 years, and then I joined a company. I sold my company and joined another company in Carlsbad, California. that eventually asked me to go to the East Coast because I was doing all of my selling to the East Coast from the West. They wanted an office in New York, and Wall Street likes to deal with companies that have actual manufacturer representation in New York.
Yeah, you got to be there. You do.
You do. And so I moved to New York, but in 1999, I was recruited by Quantum Corporation in their magnetic tape drive division. That's the division that sold products to companies like Wall Street firms that would connect to their networks and back up all of their data. And so we had the de facto standards for that. And again, Quantum was told, if you really want to have a real presence here, you have to have an office. So I was hired to open an office, and I went looking around, and I had all these delusions of grandeur about we ought to do it in the World Trade Center and all that, but I figured it was going to be expensive, and so I didn't go there first. I just looked around a bit, and eventually I said, okay, I got to go check it out. So I went to the World Trade Center and talked to this guy who made a serious mistake in talking to me, because he said, we only have about 80% occupancy because of the bombing that took place in 1993.
Right.
So we're really trying to get people. Bottom line is, by the time we finished negotiating, we got 1,400 square feet of office space on the 78th floor of the World Trade Center at $2 a square foot.
Okay, now, Michael, that is amazing. Now, you have...
You can't get a house for that.
No, you can't. You really can't. My house, I won't let you live here for that. In fact, I wouldn't let you live here anyway. Well, yes, I would. But
that's good, because I've lived in New Jersey. It's anyway. Go ahead.
So it's just south of New York City, actually. So
we lived in Westfield, and we loved it. We loved it. Anyway,
so let's talk about the morning of September 11th, 2001, and you went to work with your guide dog.
So we opened the office in August of 2000, and it was a fully functional facility, alliteration, with staff that sold products, pre-sales engineers, sales support engineers, lots of products to demo for people, and so on. And we were up and running, and in fact, we had a lot of reseller partners, and we also had what are called distributors. So a distributor is a company that we work with. They would buy our products, and they would resell them to little companies that couldn't necessarily establish credit accounts with bigger companies like Quantum, and it's not convenient for Quantum to have hundreds or thousands of little reseller accounts when you can just sell to one distributor and let them do it. And they actually established the accounts with all the little companies. So anyway, this one distributor, Ingram Micro, wanted to have sales training for all of its reseller partners and our partners in the New York City area. So we set that up to do on, September 11th, 2001. So I went to work with my guide dog, Roselle, and we were in our office. Some early arrivals had come from Ingram Micro, and a colleague from our corporate office, David Frank, was with me. He had come in that morning from California, where his office was. He was part of corporate, so the ATL corporate offices were in Irvine, actually, on the UCI campus. And
that's so ironic.
Yeah, I know, isn't it? So we were there. So David and I were in my office creating a list of the people who would be coming that day, because there were two ways you could get into an office in the World Trade Center complex. Way one, you went to the desk, you showed your ID, they called up and they said, can John Timpane come up and visit? And of course, we had a standing order that he couldn't. But
thank you. Shows good sense. Thank you, Michael.
But you could go and say, I'm John Timpane, and here's my ID, and they would call up and we'd say, sure, send him up. Or we could create a list of the people who we expected, which especially worked with large meetings, and we had 50 people who were coming to different seminars in the course of the day. So David and I were creating the list. The list was done. I was reaching for stationery to print the list because it had to go in on corporate stationery, and then we would fax it down. When we heard a muffled explosion, the building kind of shuddered, and then it literally began to tip in one direction, kind of going southeast toward Tower 2. David and I kind of wondered what was going on. We had early arrivals, as I said, who were in our conference room, and they were having some breakfast that we had sent up to them and for all the other people who would be coming. David asked if it was an earthquake, and I said, no, I don't think so, because it's moving in one direction. And I said, it sounded like a little bit of an explosion, but he said, it wasn't a very loud explosion. Well, of course, it wasn't a loud explosion because what happened was the airplane hit the building 18 floors above us on the other side of the building. So there's a lot of insulation between us and where the plane hit. But tall buildings like that are flexible, right? And so they're made to tip and be buffeted around in windstorms. And because one aircraft hit the Empire State Building in the 1940s, a military aircraft in a fog bank,
Right.
they knew the value of having very flexible buildings. Picture it like a big spring, right? You fasten the spring to the table, to a table, hold the bottom of it, and then push the top of the spring. That's exactly what happened to Tower 1.
And did you personally feel the impact? Did it go through the floor? I've always wondered
you
about
could
this.
you could feel it shudder, you could feel it, and then we could feel the building tip. And in fact, we tipped so far, I say about 20 feet altogether, that David and I said goodbye to each other because we thought we were about to take a 78 floor plunge to the street.
Oh God! So you had a moment of terror even then.
Oh yeah. But then the building stopped and it started moving back the other way, and I kind of remember letting out my breath. I didn't even know I was holding it, right?
Yeah.
But it went back to being vertical, and I went back into the office I was standing in the doorway to our outer office. Really a lot of good that would do if the building collapsed, but I grew up in Palmdale in the earthquake country. Building moves, go to door.
Right.
Roselle, my guide dog, was asleep under the desk. But as I went back in, she came out. I took her leash. I told her to come around and heel, which meant to come around me and sit on my left side, which she did. About the time she sat down, the building dropped straight down about 6 feet. That's because the expansion joints were going back to their normal configuration.
Oh yes, right. Because to stretch, the joints pay out a little bit.
That's right.
All right. Okay. So ladies and gentlemen, I just want to say, you can see why Michael Hingson was able to earn a master's in physics. He's extraordinarily good at explaining things like this, and this reminds me more of you than anything else. Just extraordinary talent at being able to explain these things. Continue.
Well, one of the things that I also need to say is, being blind, and being the leader of that office, I felt it was my obligation to know anything and everything I could about the World Trade Center and where things were and so on. So I literally spent a lot of time early in our tenure at the center learning where different places were, learning where the restaurants were, even not going with a guide dog, using a cane to travel around and learning where all the kiosks were in the middle of the floor that the dog would just go around, and learning all the emergency evacuation procedures from the Port Authority people and so on. Because I knew that if there were ever an emergency, the bottom line is sighted people, no offense, but sighted people don't pay attention to that. They figured we can look at the signs and it'll tell us where to go. Well, that works and doesn't. So it was important for me to know. So if there was smoke and people couldn't see signs, I was there. But the bottom line is that also created for me a mindset of, if there's an emergency, this is what you do. And literally every day I went into the complex, I kind of had a thought flash in front of me. If there's an emergency today, what will you do? Do you know everything that you need to know? And sometimes I discovered things I didn't know, and I would go find them out. So that literally on September 11th, the mindset kicked in. And after the building dropped about 6 feet, David looked out the window and he started shouting, "Oh my God, Mike, there's fire and smoke above us. We got to get out of here right now. There are millions of pieces of burning paper falling outside our windows." And you could hear debris falling outside the window. And I was wondering what it was. Now I knew, millions of pieces of burning paper, according to David. And he kept saying, "We got to get out of here." And I kept saying, "David, slow down. We'll get out. But no, we don't need to panic. No, we got to get out of here right now. The building's on fire. I can see the fire and smoke, and we got to get out of here." And I kept saying, "Slow down." Our guests began to scream, and they were moving toward the exit. And then they heard me tell David, "Slow down." And eventually David used the big line, "You don't understand. You can't see it." The problem wasn't what I didn't see and understand. The problem was what David didn't see and didn't understand. Sitting next to me was a guide dog who was wagging her tail and yawning and going, "What woke me up?" Now, John, you've been you were on a newspaper staff long enough, and I'm sure you have too. You've read stories about animals that sensed danger and saved their humans before the humans detected buildings on fire and all that. And Roselle was afraid of thunder, so I knew what she was like when she was fearful. She wasn't indicating any fear, which was another signal to me that whatever was going on wasn't so imminent for us that we couldn't try to evacuate in an orderly manner of some sort. Could have changed in a moment, but you got to go by the data that you have. And that was a piece of data that I had that David didn't. I finally got David to focus and said, get our guests to the stairs. So he took them to the stairs, and while he was gone, I called my wife Karen at home and said there had been an explosion or something at the complex, and we were going to be evacuating. So it's right now about 8:47. I think I still have the phone bill because I saw that time later when the phone bill came in to the company. But I told her, and I love to say this because it's really true. I scooped Good Morning America, getting to her 8 minutes before they got an idea that there was a problem at the World Trade Center. Nobody gives me a Pulitzer for that, so disappointed.
But you get a nice round of applause today.
Hey.
But seriously, I told her, and so of course she then was watching TV, and at least it prepared her some when people started calling her, was Mike there and all that. So David came back, we swept the office, we went to the stairs, and we started down. And almost immediately I began smelling an odor, and it took me about 4 floors to realize that it was something I smelled whenever I went to airports, and I did a lot of travel for the company. It was the fumes from burning jet fuel. And so I realized...
You could really smell that when you were in the stairwell.
Oh, yeah. Because the aircraft, when it hit the building, crashed through the center and literally blew a hole through the whole building, which was why David was seeing fire and smoke and millions of pieces of burning paper above him, right?
Yeah, right.
So I smelled that, and when I observed and realized what it was, I mentioned it to other people, David and others who were around us, because we were all wondering what it was. I said, it's the fumes from burning jet fuel. And they went, oh, yeah, we couldn't figure it out. That's what it is. So we assumed we were hit by an airplane, but we had no idea as to why. Now, the press, the lovely press that we have, every time I've had interviews since, reporters say, or often they say, well, of course you didn't know what happened because you couldn't see what occurred. I said, wait a minute. The last time I checked, Superman was fictitious and there is no such thing as X-ray vision. The airplane hit 18 floors above us on the other side of the building. I got to tell you, nobody where I was saw what happened, right? And I said, look, the bottom line is I figured out that an airplane hit us before other people did on the stairs where we were. We had burn victims pass us going down. You probably heard about a woman who was right in front of an elevator when a cloud of fuel vapor ignited and it burned her. And I think she was one of the ones who passed us. But we had burn victims pass us, and then a woman near us on the stairs stopped and said, I can't go on. And literally we surrounded her and had a group hug and just said, come on, you can do it. Roselle was giving her kisses, and we were able to keep her going down the stairs.
So was that a psychological moment for her or a physical moment that she just couldn't continue going down the stairs?
It was more psychological.
And so to paint the picture, I mean, you are now physically going down the stairs step by step, one hand on the railing, one hand holding Roselle's leash.
Well, part of the time I used the harness. If I was over on the right side, the rail was on the left. There wasn't a handrail on the right-hand side. So if I could, I used the harness.
Yes.
To let Roselle work. But if it was too crowded or whatever, then I would hold onto the rail. I'd move to the left side and hold the rail and just hold the leash.
And were people generally orderly as far as you could tell?
Yes. Yeah. There were a couple of times that people started to lose it a bit, like at the 50th floor, David did. He suddenly said, Mike, we're going to die. We're not going to make it out of here. And of course, as I said earlier, I took the courses and got a secondary teaching credential. There's a secret course that they have for budding teachers that they don't tell you about. It's the class that's titled Yelling at Students 101. And so I had to. So not really a true class. But as soon as David said that, I just said in as sharp a voice as I could, stop it, David. If Roselle and I can go down these stairs, so can you. And he told me later that brought him out of his funk. And but he wanted to do.
It's really too bad you didn't have a ruler to crack him on the knuckles with as well.
Well, I was holding Roselle's harness, so I couldn't get to my ruler.
Okay.
So I said that, and David then told me, okay, I'm okay now. And what he wanted to do was something that would take his mind off of all of it. So he said, I'm going to walk a floor below you and start shouting up to you everything that I see on the stairs. And I will tell you that I think that's one of the most incredible events that I experienced that day. So why? Well, we're going down the stairs. I'm on like the 49th floor now, and he's at 48. He's going, Mike, I'm at the 48th floor. Everything is good here. Going on down. I'm up on the 49th floor. Good girl, Roselle. Keep going forward, and really encouraging her and speaking to let her know I was okay. Because if I started to sound nervous, she's going to be looking at me and not focusing as well as she should. So it was important for me to be calm and focus on her. That's the team effort that we both make and made then that helped each other. But then I get to 48 and David, 47th floor, all good here. So why do I think what David did was so great? Because in reality, he became a focal point for anyone who could hear him, above him or below him. They would hear him, Mike, 46th floor, all is good here. And they knew somewhere on the stairs there was somebody who was sounding okay. And I know that he kept thousands of people calm just by doing what he did, which I think was really cool. And it's one of the most incredible experiences I had that day. It took me a while to figure out why I thought that was so important, because did I need him to tell me what was going on? No, because it wouldn't make a difference to me, but it helped him. But more important, it really did help so many other people on the stairs who heard him, above him, below him, people who couldn't see him, but they all knew somewhere there's somebody who's doing okay.
Now, Mike, how many people were on the stairs with you? Do you have an idea
of? I mean, they were all the way up and down the stairs, so there were thousands. Like right where we were, there was a knot of anywhere from 10 to 20 people, but they were all up and down the stairs. It was a constant stream of people.
Do you know, that's a really good question Don asks, because I've often wondered, I mean, okay, so you kept calm and everything, but inside of you, I mean, you must have had all sorts of thoughts.
Well, I got to tell you, I was just listening for any creak and groan that would tell us that the building was going to come down on us, and I knew it wouldn't make a difference, but I was listening. Yeah. And, I love science fiction. I watched The Twilight Zone and other shows, so I could imagine all sorts of horrible things that might be going on. Sure. But I also knew that I had to manage that. And I'm just going to jump for a quick second. That has led to a coaching program that we just started called Blinded by Fear, because a lot of people have fear issues. Something happens to them and they don't know how to control their fear, and they get so fearful that they can't make decisions because the fear has completely overtaken them. So I want to help people learn how to control those fears, and not to say don't be afraid. I think fear is a very, very powerful and an invaluable thing to have, but you have to control it. So people can go to blindedbyfear.net, and there's an ebook they can download, and we can schedule calls and talk about it. So it's a coaching program.
So it's a coaching program, and it's such a wonderful initiative. And I want to just repeat that, blindedbyfear.net and .net, and that's for everyone.
Well, it is. It's not blindness related. I've been a public speaker for 19 years, so jumping ahead a little bit, afterward people started hearing about me because Guide Dogs for the Blind was one of the first places I called, since I had a guide dog from there. And they put out a story and contacted some news media, which led to me being on Larry King Live 5 times, the first time of which was on the 14th of September. Right. 3 days later. Yes. And so the media got the story, and people started contacting me saying, would you come and talk to our group or our company or whatever. The first call I got was from a pastor who was going to conduct an ecumenical church service to honor the people that we lost on September 11th. And he was doing it, I think, 2 weeks after September 11th. So it would have been the 25th or the 26th. And I had not really been a public speaker, but I said, okay, sure, I would be happy to come and tell the story a little bit. He said, you got like about 5 or 6 minutes. And I kind of happened to ask do you expect very many people? And he says, yeah, we'll probably have about 6,000. So my first public speech was to 6,000 people.
Unbelievable.
And Lisa Beamer, whose husband Todd was on Flight 93, he was the guy who said, let's roll. She was also there. And
Roselle helping you down. This is something else that you've worked extensively with guide dogs for the blind. And you've said that Roselle wasn't leading you.
A guide dog doesn't lead. The purpose of the dog is to make sure that we walk safely. The dog doesn't know where I want to go or how to get there. And in fact, I don't want the dog to know that. It was really a challenge working in the World Trade Center to try to find different ways to get from point A to point B so that Roselle would not, and Linny, who also was my fourth guide dog who worked before Roselle, would not get in the habit of going one way. Because what if I couldn't go that way in an emergency? So I was very deliberate about finding various ways, even if it was just going a different direction around a central area to get back to the same place, but doing it in such a way that the dog wouldn't know where I wanted to go. Because their job is to make sure that we walk safely, and that's it. So if we're crossing a street, on the other hand, and suddenly the dog stops and pulls back, my job is to assume there's a reason for that, like a quiet car coming that I didn't hear, which is usually the case. Now, I also point out that working with a guide dog, it's all about developing a team. And it is a true team relationship in every sense of the word, like SEAL teams and any close-knit team. If it turns out that the dog was distracted, and normally they're not, because they're part of the reason they become guide dogs is they've demonstrated that they can work without being distracted. But if a dog saw a duck and decided it wanted to go visit the duck, I guarantee you there'll be a team meeting and the team members will discuss the behavior of somebody who was not doing what they were supposed to do.
Exactly.
But that's all, it's called intelligent disobedience. The dog also has the authority, and I need to respect it, the authority to say that I got to do this, and I have the obligation of following the dog, because the odds are incredibly high that whatever the dog is doing, it's doing for a very legitimate reason. It's called intelligent disobedience.
Interesting. Was the descent fairly, from the point of view of the guide dog and you, was it fairly smooth? It
was. And, but we worked, and several of us worked to keep it smooth. There was one point on the stairs where people were getting real quiet, and that was like about 15 floors after my discussion that I had about David. And people were just getting real quiet. So I just said, I can't let these people be so quiet. So I just said to people, look, we're not going to be able to come back into this building for a while, but what we ought to do is on our first day back, let's all meet on the 78th floor at 8:45 in the morning and walk down the stairs together. What a great way to lose weight, huh? And then another one that I did, also same principle and same issues, it was getting quiet. I said, as loud as I could, now everybody, I want you to listen to me. My name is Mike. I happen to be blind. I've got my guide dog here, and we had power and lighting and all that on the stairs. And I said, if we lose power and lighting on the stairs, I don't want anyone to worry. Roselle and I are offering a half-price special to get you out today only. And I did those kinds of things because I wanted people not to worry.
Yes.
What are the flight attendants doing on airplanes when they're doing those pre-flight briefings? Well, if they're doing their jobs right, they're also really looking to see who's paying attention to those briefings, because they've learned over the years that the people who really pay attention are probably the people who can help them if they need to get people to evacuate from an aircraft.
Do we know how many people made it down with you? How many people made it out of the buildings?
Well, we know that all the people who were with me made it out. Only about 10% of the people who didn't make it out were below where the planes hit. Most of the people who didn't make it out were trapped above where the planes hit. So there were some stories of people who couldn't go down the stairs. There was a guy, a quadriplegic in a wheelchair, and there was somebody who was very obese and they just couldn't walk down, and they didn't make it out, and there were people who even stayed with them, things like that. But mostly everyone who didn't make it out were the people above where the planes hit.
How long after you got out of the building before the thing came down? I mean,
so we got out at about 10:45, about 10, When did we get out? No, we started at 8:45, 8:50. We started down at about 9:35. We got to the bottom of the stairs. About another 10 minutes to go through the whole complex. So by 9:45, we were out. Tower 2 collapsed at like 10:04, 10:05. And we were about 100 yards away. We knew there was fire in the tower, but we had no clue what was going on. No one told us. They just said leave the area. So we went over to Broadway and started going north on Broadway. We were about Vesey Street, so about 100 yards airline ways from Tower 2 when it collapsed. So then everybody ran, and we ran and ended up in a subway station. Then a police officer came at about probably 10:15, 10:20, and told us that the air was clearer up above and we needed to get out of there now. And so we left and went back upstairs and continued to walk away. And it was about 10:30 or so when Tower 1 collapsed. So we were a little bit a ways away from it, and so we didn't have the same issues that we did when we were so close to Tower 2 collapsing.
How did Roselle do on the once you guys were outside and walking on the street?
She did really well all day. And in fact, when we got home that night, the first thing I did is I took her harness off, and she ran to find her favorite tug toy and our retired guide, Linny, so they could start playing together. I mean, Roselle didn't even want to go out. She was too busy playing. Eventually, she went out, but it was over for her because there was nothing that threatened her, but she was glad to be home and wanted to show it.
I mean, in the years since, you have used your story as a way to talk about, the role of the blind in society, and how you were able to function, and in some ways function better than those who had sight.
It wasn't the fact that I didn't see that perhaps helped me focus. It was the fact that I learned to establish a mindset that allowed me to use knowledge to be able to function rather than being afraid. It was something that evolved over time. So in 2010, a woman named Susie Flory called me, who was writing a book on animals and on dogs and famous dog stories, and wanted to include Roselle's. But when we spoke, she said, "You ought to write your own book." And I said, "I've been working toward it, but it's just not been coming together." And she offered to help. So the two of us collaborated. We worked with our agent, Chip McGregor, who is a very famous literary agent. And he sold the contract, and we wrote Thunderdog, the story of a blind man, the guide dog, and the triumph of trust at Ground Zero, that was published in 2011. It was in its first week out a New York Times bestseller. It's been a #1 New York Times bestseller. And then 2 years later, we wrote Running with Roselle, which is more for youth, telling the story of Roselle and me growing up.
Thunderdog is great story, great book. I enjoyed reading.
It is still very much out there, and someday it'll be more visible again. We're working toward a movie, but that's still a ways off. But Thunderdog is available wherever you get books. It was published by Thomas Nelson Publishing, which is now part of HarperCollins. And Running with Roselle was self-published. It's on Amazon, and so people can go find one or both books. And being a poor starving author, we encourage people to go buy the book. And Audible has it and all that sort of stuff too.
Mike, let's fast forward a little bit. You have established yourself through the books and your experience as a speaker, as a motivational speaker. And now we're getting into the computer age. And this is something that you and I were talking about before we started the program here, is that you're involved now in trying to make sure that computers are compatible with people who have sight problems. Is that right?
Well, computers are mostly compatible for blind people or people with vision impairments, but websites are not. Very few websites are truly accessible. And long story short, I found a company that was doing some very clever things to make that happen, and started talking with them about reselling the products. And what ended up happening was that this company, which is called Accessibe, ACCESSIBE, on Tuesday hired me in a senior management role to be the chief vision officer for Accessibe. So it's www.accessibe.com. And what they do is, rather than rewriting a person's website to make it accessible, you put one line of code in your site, and then they have a very sophisticated artificial intelligence package up in the cloud that examines your site and literally creates what is probably best described as an overlay. It's something that when a person with a screen reader, that's the software that I use to hear what's going on the screen, or a person with any kind of vision impairment that needs more high contrast or larger characters, or an epileptic who is, has to have screens that don't flicker, which pop-ups often do. The bottom line is they can invoke accessibility. It's all done inside their browser, which means that people don't have to pay thousands of dollars to get their website rewritten, much less than when there's a change, it goes out of compliance again. And there are web standards for accessibility, and they're going to be more over time. And the problem is every time if you're a developer and you're doing someone's website and you change it, you can immediately go out of compliance, and that's a problem. And so this monitors your site and makes the changes in the overlay that just shows up on a person's web browser. So you, as a website person, only have to put one line of code. You pay $49 a month, and it's done. So, anybody that is interested to learn more about it, and if you guys want to see it, we can do a Zoom session, and I can show you my website before we put the one line of code in, and I can show you what it looks like afterward, because now the site is fully accessible. And again, the product is called Accessibility, and you can read about it. You can go to accessibility.com.
And of course, you're at MikeHingson.com.
I'm at michaelhingson.com, yeah. So people can visit www.michaelhingson.com. If you want to see the website prior to becoming accessible, you can go to just beforeaccessibility.michaelhingson.com. No www, just beforeaccessibility.michaelhingson.com. It's easier to dramatically show it to you using a screen reader and so on, but you'll see the difference. Anyone who goes will see the difference, and you'll also see an icon where you can click on it and you can change different accessible parameters and so on. It doesn't change it in my site, it changes it in your browser, which is so cool.
Mike, hey, thanks a lot for talking to us today. You have more than one exciting story to tell. And of course, you put up with Tim Payne for all those years at UCI, and now you get a chance to put up with him again.
Well, I expected nothing, and I knew he'd come through, so it's okay.
We love you, Michael. Thank you so much.
Love you guys too. Thanks very much.
And thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube. If you'd like to get in touch with us, the email address is musicalinnertube, all one word, @gmail.com. On Twitter, John is @jtimpayne, Don is @DonRooney9. Our webpage is Musical Innertube, that's musical spelled with two A's, .libsyn, spelled LIBSYN.com. The Innertube is available on Amazon Music, Facebook, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio podcasts. Like us and give us a good review on any of those platforms. And if you're a fan of old-time radio like Mike is, head on over to musicalinnertubeplayers.libsyn.com and check out all the radio plays that are waiting for you there. And as always, thanks to virtual band Car Radio Dog for our theme music.